I'll go over to Miss August Hanson.
Thanks, Julie. Some of that's already been answered just regarding virtual sittings and leave. I appreciate as well the opening statements by both candidates regarding the ambassadorial roles with the CPA, and also on the other side of the fence with Lawrence regarding the Celtic Scandinavian links and etc. What I'm quite interested in, particularly on the CPA trips that we've actually had, is what a president or an incoming president, how much should that president be encouraging a better experience out of some of these trips, because very, very regularly, obviously, we get, and it'll always happen with every politician around the world, but we get accused of going on jollies. So how can we get more learning, more substance, and more targeted trips to get the most benefit out of CPA membership and any other events or trips that we might be making as a parliament? And my second question is just sort of addressing, I suppose, a bit of an elephant in every political space regarding age, because when I've had conversations about the president's role with a few members, perhaps they've turned around and said, oh, well, one may not quite be old enough yet. I'd be interested to hear from both candidates as to what they think of that.
It's just Lawrence's youthful good looks, I think.
Description as to whether or not that might have an impact.
Okay.
Right, good point. So the travel issue, it's one we all have, isn't it? We go on whether it be a parliamentary trip, a government trip, it's a jolly. And actually, if you go on a holiday, it's a trip of guilt, because that's how it feels as a politician when you travel. But the bottom line is, it's about benefit. You've just said it there, Tanya. What is the perceived value? What is the perceived benefit? I've led a number of trade delegations, and for me, it was about the businesses that told me what that benefit was, not for me to actually think what that benefit is and try and justify that. It was the businesses. In this particular case, this is you, the members, who are going to go away on these study visits, and it's up to you. We've got to be able to design this and plan this, that you are going to get some professional development, because that's what that is meant to be, is professional development. As I said in my opening address here, you walk into all these roles with no experience whatsoever. And the best way to get that is to go and meet your counterparts elsewhere, whether that be across the water or across the globe, and understand how their working practices are, and then bring that back. And we do have a report, and it was a very interesting and illuminating, but what is the actions that come out of that? I think we should feed that into the committee, let them have a review of a particular aspect, a particular working environment or a working practice or whatever that will help benefit us, because it is that continual evolvement, I think, is important. This is involvement on Parliament, really, in this particular case. In terms of ageism, that's disappointing that people make those sort of comments, but what I would suggest is we have, this administration, moved the Equality Bill. I was one of the main architects of that, working closely with Chris Thomas, 200 plus clauses, 67 amendments, and it was meant to be, I think, probably one of the most defining pieces of legislation this administration actually moved. So we must have that forefront, and what we do is thinking about equality. So that's the only thing I would say with regards to that.
Yeah, certainly in my early years as a parliamentarian, I did go on Commonwealth Parliamentary Association visits and found them really useful, really educational, and anyone who's been on them will I'm sure say that. It does broaden the horizons. It does give you a critical way of thinking about how we do things here and how we can do things better here, and that's a constant challenge. We always look to bring that learning back, and as I've moved on through my parliamentary career, it's been good to sort of take delegations when we have a delegation of 4, for example, at a regional conference, and then to lead that and help those members get the most out of the conference by pushing them into doing seminars, witnesses, and chairing sessions, as I've done over my time. And then the next step after that is standing for CPA office and using that to influence what the CPA does. And it has turned more into an educational body, and I think that's all the better. So pushing members to do the parliamentary qualifications that the CPA is now offering, the CPA Academy, are really positive. The President, however, generally speaking, is not a travelling parliamentarian with the CPA. Not to say that I wouldn't do it if the CPA themselves wants me to do that, but in terms of the Isle of Man branch, the President doesn't normally be one of the delegates to conferences on behalf of the Isle of Man, and I think that's quite right. That is definitely something that we need to encourage new members into and have people come up through and have that learning at that point. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, over to Kerry.
Thanks. You've both mentioned impartiality, and there's no doubt that this is a key element to being President Tynwald. I'd like to ask you a very open-ended question, really, and that's, what does impartiality look like to you in terms of the role?
Is that me? Well, that's an easy one, because it's something that I have to battle with on a weekly basis. The 3 weeks of the month that I'm in the House of Keys, I have to be impartial. I have to draw that line between government backbencher and between the different factions within the camps of backbenchers, if you like, making sure that people get an equal opportunity to ask supplementary questions, that ministers are treated fairly within that. They're not trying to push for answers that are outside the scope of the question. But impartiality doesn't mean not being an active referee. And so, for example, I would see the role as being something that speak up for the institution, speak up for the role of President within Tynwald and for Legislative Council within Tynwald as well. So that would be how I would define impartiality. That might be a brief answer, but it's something that I have lived with on a weekly basis over the last 5 years, because then I get to take the gloves off in Tynwald and be as partial as I like. And I suppose that would be the one thing that would change.
Yeah, it's interesting, really, isn't it? I listened to what retiring President Roden said, also what retiring President Christian said, and they said the same thing, the frustration and the difficulty, because they have been politicians, front bench politicians, and they've been backbenchers, they've been ministers, and they know both sides of it, and it is a challenge, there's no doubt about it. But I think it's a challenge that you gain by you understand by having the experience of being on both sides of that fence, i.e. the backbench and the minister. That helps them try and understand those arguments are coming from both sides at the end of the day. I've always felt as a minister, a question is always an opportunity to get a message out there. And of course, you see it over and over again, don't you? The question is put to you as a minister. The minister answers that question as the minister sees fit, and may or may not get the answer. So it's in question time, it's always a challenge. But in terms of impartiality, that comes down to, I think, the integrity. You know, and that comes back to the principles of public life. You must have integrity in this role. That is absolutely crucial, and that's something you earn over time. Respect you earn over time, and you'll only determine that when you go back to, as I highlighted earlier, and I think the other unwritten benefit of a president is playing that pastoral and well-being role, where members can come and talk confidentially about various issues.
Okay.
Thank you, Julie. I'd still be interested to hear Mr. Speaker's response, I think, to Tanya's question about age of president. I don't think you got that. But I don't think you...
Sorry, no, I would say that when we start making decisions based on age rather than experience, we set a bad example to others.
Thanks. Mine's really about, I suppose, the promotional aspect of the President's role, both on island and further afield. It is about promoting Tynwald, the Parliament, and the functioning and what we do. Mr. Roden has been very active, particularly in the engagement of younger voters and trying to encourage more of an interest and, I suppose, voting amongst that age. So just to the two candidates, how would you describe your relationship with the various media on the island, and how would you use them and new media in all its forms to continue that promotional aspect of the President and the work at Tynwald?
Yeah, sorry, was that me? Okay, first of all, the media we have here today. This is a first, isn't it? A hustings for the President, whereas the public don't get a vote. But they get an opportunity to learn what the actual role is. Because I've had that asked of me ever since I made the statement that I'm willing to put my name in the hat. What's the President? What's the difference? What about the Chief Minister? Should it be publicly elected? All these sort of questions. So there is a challenge out there, I think, in terms of comms more than anything else, to say what the difference between Parliament and government are. We live in this bubble, really, don't we? Here, what we do, but it's out there is the real challenge. So we have to embrace new media, whether we like it or not, and it is completely and utterly double-edged sword, and everyone in this room knows that. But we must embrace it, and we must use it to our advantage to promote the message and the value of what is Tynwald. Because let's face it, what is Tynwald? Tynwald is the oldest and most ancient institute the island has got, and it's something we must protect with everything we do. So media should be used to the full extent. And in terms of outreach, that really is about a programme, really, effectively. And that's with, we all should play a role in that. As Mr Speaker highlighted earlier, bringing the young people in here. We've got our constituency primary schools coming in here on a regular basis every year. And it's wonderful because they get that educational opportunity. But we must do more. Clearly, we must do more. And it's the young people who you really need to target it. But there's many other groups where we can and should host interesting, interactive visits here.
And so forgive me, just on the point of how do you describe your relationship with the various media on the island? Because as politicians, there's always negative headlines over the years, particularly.
Yes.
So what's your relationship, would you say, with the media?
For me personally, I've never turned down an interview. So I know Paul's actually been challenging to try and get me for one just upcoming, but that has been a challenge. But I've never turned down any interview. So I'm willing, always willing and able to engage. And I think it is important to be able to do that because at the end of the day, and it is all sources of media. You know, I've mentioned new media there, which is important, but also print is very important as well as radio. They are all equally important because they have different audiences.
Thank you. I think, like Lawrence, I've got a good working relationship with all sectors of the media on a professional basis. I don't think I've turned down an interview. I do think far more needs to be done in terms of making people aware of the difference between Tynwald and government. I think people really still don't get that out there in the general public, and I think that needs to be done not just via the media but also directly by getting people in. That's why I have for the last 15 years organised the schools visits for all the schools in the patch to come in here and do that once a year. That's why I have been so keen to be involved in Junior Tynwald, which I think is an underutilised resource in terms of youth engagement, to really make sure that people have the opportunity to understand. And that's wider groups as well. I've done tours for everything from scouts and cadets as well, because I think it's about our young people and educating them as well as older people, and anyone else who wants to come in through this door should be absolutely encouraged to do so. So when you combine that with pretty encyclopedic knowledge of the 1,000 years of parliamentary history, which I'm an absolute geek at and really love sharing with others, but the real message though is about what it means to them, and that's the absolute critical message to get across, the difference between Parliament and government and what that means to you, the Manx taxpayer, the Manx voter. That connection's critical.
Right. Given that pay of the President and the Speaker, both presiding officers, is going to be the same as a Minister, would you consider there's still the need for two presiding officers?
That's my turn. Yes, I think there is. There is still a need for a distinction there, because the houses are still two separate entities, constitutionally speaking. They perform two different functions, and that's why I do think the difference that we see where the Speaker at the moment has a constituency role, has a presiding officer role, and has a lot of committee work. The President at the moment doesn't have that constituency role. Certainly I think there's a lot more that can be done in that space with the time that's available, certainly that I've identified, to say that the President should be a far more full-time job. And I think I've set out some of my ideas, and just some of the ideas that I would have in terms of where I think more can be done in a lot of these areas to make sure that it is more of a full-time job that's fitting with the full-time pay that task currently attracts?
Yeah, good question. A consistent question there from you, Graham. And I guess it goes back to the emoluments that was where we had this long, drawn-out process of where we ended up, really painful as it were. The bottom line there, this part of reform, therefore it's in the hands of the members. So if there is a proposal, the opportunity there is to try and build a consensus and make that reform happen. So that for the president, again being impartial, could they do both roles? Yes, they probably could. I don't think there's any question of doubt that could be achieved, but it's in the hands of the members.
Supplementary.
Yeah, just on from that, because saying about the role being developed and showing people around Parliament, I am deeply concerned that for virtually £70,000 a year, you've got a tour guide. When you've been to other parliaments, they have guides that go around it. And that's where I have been consistent, like Lauren said, that I felt that the President's role was overpaid for what that role is. So would you consider, as part of your roles in the next term, reviewing, I know we've got an independent review, but acknowledging the difference in role between the Minister, a Speaker and the President?
I think we've set on a path now where independent review is the way forward. And that is the way it should be done, and that's what we did as the Emoluments Committee. Needless to say, as perhaps the busiest of the presiding officers with a constituent, I'm the one that got the £2,000 pay cut, not the president, but that's fine. I'm still standing for this job, knowing what it entails and knowing that its pay is constantly subject to independent review.
Yeah, no, I do get that, but what we want to consider there, though, Graham, is one of the things that came out of that, that was parliamentary, was actually the change in the patronage issue with regards to members sitting in departments, which will be very interesting to see how that comes out, because that highlights another role. It's not picked up here. I know we're having different hustings, but about the value of scrutiny. So now you are not penalised if you want to take that particular role there. But ultimately, again, it comes down to the members. Doing tours around Tynwald, that is very minimal part of the outreach programme, and can be done. But there is value, depending on who you're doing those tours for, to actually have it with the Speaker, with the President, or even with your own constituency MHK. People do like that and do enjoy that. I know that because through personal experience.
Okay, go online again to Tanya.
Thanks, Julie. We talked about the President's role becoming a more full-time role. How would it become a more full-time role? What would the day then be filled with, the week, the month then be filled with? And the second question is, what specific, because obviously I'm a Legislative Council member, and alongside the Tynwald role there is also the Legislative Council role. What specific, the changes, the update that is coming to Legislative Council standing orders, what elements of that do you agree with? What do you not agree with? Have you read the paper that was produced by Legislative Council and published? And what did you think of it? Thanks, Julie.
Right. Well, the full-time role, in essence, it comes down to productivity of the members. And it probably gets back to Bill's question there with regards to, should we have more sit-ins? Well, we have more sit-ins. We can actually, let's move more legislation. Let's have more motions. Let's be more productive. Ultimately, so the presiding officer is there really to facilitate that. So it comes down to the productivity of government effectively, but not government, but parliamentarians as well, because they're responsible for the creation of what becomes the order paper. So could there be more sittings? Could we work other hours? So yeah, I don't see a problem with that, but that's the predominant side of it. But filling in that, I would come back to probably the The two elements that jump out to me is the modernisation issue. That's something I think the Tynwald Management Committee needs to pick up fairly quickly to understand how do we have more of this, how do we modernise our own workplaces, practices, make sure that we are efficient, we are effective. And secondly, I'll bring it up again, is the ambassadorial role. That's where the President, beyond doing tours around Tynwald, should be more active on the international stage.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not a massively dissimilar answer in terms of the training support of members is something that I think has been something that I've tried to do as part of the many jobs that I've done as Speaker, and been spread too thin to do it as well as I think it could be done, in terms of the outreach and community, being out and about in the community all over the place, all over the island all the time, in order to be able to achieve that. In terms of the legislative work, I know that in the past, presidents have been able to work with and support others, as I do as Speaker, doing that legislative support behind the scenes, in terms of making bills better and having that dialogue with ministers, because obviously you can't do that in the chamber in the same way. And in terms of the second part of the question which you raised, which was about the functioning of Legislative Council and their report, that is a really good report. And the important thing is there that work needs coordinating with the House of Keys work, because there are implications for both there about its interaction between the branches and with government. And that's something that, again, needs to be looked at as part of that going forward. But there are, there's a lot to do in that.